Yes. You know, back in school, the substitute teacher would always have like a 2-word phrase, like, settle down, and they would just keep saying it, because they didn't know anybody's names or anything. Settle down, settle down. Well, I'm sure you really enjoyed the first half of tonight's reading, which was the fictional half of the reading. Now we're moving on to reality. And to celebrate that, I'm going to tell you a little story, my own little personal Chinatown story. I was born in Queens, but I grew up in Jersey. But we came into Chinatown regularly for all kinds of lunches and dinners and boring events with old people, But I remember one time we came into Chinatown for a Buddhist funeral, and we had this meal at the temple afterwards. And I was eating, and then I got a bone in my bowl. And I was really shocked because I had been told that it was a vegetarian meal. So I went up to one of the monks and I said, I got a bone in my meal. And he takes it and he says, this is a toothpick. This is a toothpick that we use while we cook our food. And then he announced to everybody, this is going to be a really lucky boy. And it's true. Speaking of lucky boys, I want to tell you about our next reader. And this, I know I'm not going to have to lower the mic. Alvin Eng. Alvin Eng is a native NYC author, playwright, activist, educator, and acoustic punk raconteur. He is currently a New York Public Library Fellow, developing a companion book to his memoir, Our Laundry, Our Town, My Chinese American Life, from Flushing to the Downtown Stage and Beyond. His next book, Urban Oracle Bones, will examine the profound impact of the Opium Wars and opium on the Chinese diaspora in NYC, as well as on the 1970s heroin chic, punk counterculture of Alvin's teenage years. Other books include 3 Trees, Alberto Giacometti historical drama, and Tokens, the NYC Asian American Experience on stage, oral history / performance text anthology. His plays and performances have been seen off-Broadway in Paris, Hong Kong, and Guangzhou, China. Alvin made his Think Chinatown debut at the 2019 Chinatown Arts Week, performing monologues from his play, The Last Emperor of Flushing, at the Chen Dance Center at 70 Mulberry Street. At the 2021 Chinatown Arts Festival, he performed monologues and songs from Here Comes Johnny Yen Again, or How I Kicked Punk, with special guest Geoff Lee on lead guitar. Yes. At the 21 Pell Street Chinatown Door Jams. Last year, the festival co-hosted the paperback launch of Our Laundry, Our Town with the Chatham Square Library. Tonight, he's back. It's Alvin.
It's wonderful to be here at my 4th appearance with the Chinatown Arts Week, became the Chinatown Arts Festival. One more time for Ed Lin and for Think Chinatown. Okay. So I'm just going to read a few stories about the bloody ankle. No, I'm just kidding.
The time's up.
I said, usually they don't put the cane out for me until about 5 minutes in, so I'm like, history. Okay, this is from Our Laundry, Our Town. I'm going to read 2 excerpts. This is from a chapter, and it's a great theme. And we can sing Chinatown, My Chinatown at the end. So okay, I'd love to hear it. Okay, I loved how Schwartz rocks those 88s. So we'll see how that goes. Okay, so I'm going to remember two things. Does anyone remember the Rosemary Theater? Yeah! Okay, so we're going to memories about the Rosemary Theater and about 32 East Broadway when ACB was there. Does anyone? Yeah. I think I met you there at ACB, yeah. And so here they go. We're gonna go back to the 20th century. Okay. This is from a chapter called "It's Only a Paper Son." S-O-N. Every Sunday of my childhood, we would venture across two bridges and three boroughs, from Flushing, Queens, across Brooklyn, and over the Manhattan Bridge to Chinatown. These weekly ventures also, let's find a better angle. There we go. These weekly ventures also gave me subliminal glimpses into the very different, almost polar opposite dispositions of Dad and the Empress Mother. That's what I call my mother in this book. It was literally like night and day. During the day, we would visit the Empress Mother's Chinatown, a family, friends, dim sum, and shopping. When the sun went down, we were in Dad's Chinatown. Namely, in the balcony of that rundown old Chinatown movie house, the Rosemary Theater. While my parents would be captivated by the on-screen larger-than-life Cantonese opera and melodrama performance in what my 8-year-old self called pots and pans movies, I would be captivated and even a little leery of all the old men sitting by themselves, bathed in the half-light of the often violent imagery of Cantonese cinema. In the evening, Chinatown's loud, bustling, family-filled streets gave way to a quiet, desolate, and dirty cityscape that seemed to be populated only by individual members of the fabled Chinatown Bachelor Society. The Chinatown Bachelor Society men, they were the living legacy of the walking wounded of America's Chinese Exclusion Act. The laws and the tide turned too late for these men. Their prime years, when they could have married or brought over wives and established families, they were long gone. Now their world was that netherworld known as Chinatown at night. They came out only after the tourists left and the shops shut down. This generation carried the historical weight and psychological scars of being the isolated sons of the men who built the Transcontinental Railroad and then were not invited to be part of the celebration and the historic photo commemorating its completion. Most of these isolated men lived many years of sporadic outsider work, sporadic outsider pay. Decades of tough love, tough hats, tough breaks, and little or no love shaped these men's outlooks, insights, even their body language. Individually, they appeared ill at ease, even perplexed that somehow they wound up living alone in New York City's Lower Manhattan, circa late 20th century America. But with one another, they seemed to create and complete a seamless, timeless world of their own, one you could feel but never touch. Looking back, it makes perfect sense that every Sunday night at the Rosemary Theater, Dad would carry on with these isolated Chinatown Bachelor Society men with greater grace and ease than he did in any other stratum of his life. Dad may have had 5 biological children and an arranged wife of his own, but spiritually, he would always be a member of the Chinatown Bachelor Society. And now this is from chapter 9, if you're keeping score. And this is called The Bigger Picture On Screen and Off. As if preordained, on the weekend the Empress Mother and I got back from China, the 1987 Asian American International Film Festival, AAIFF, was opening in Manhattan. It was being held at the Rosemary Theater, the same Chinatown movie house where my parents used to drag me to see those pots and pans movies on Sunday nights. This was also the same theater where my dad would reconnect with his cronies from the Chinatown Bachelor Society. Now, some 16 years later, the big screen of the Rosemary no longer flickered with images of Cantonese opera and melodrama. At this film festival, the Chinese American characters spoke good English with their friends, then went home and spoke horrible Chinese with their families. Seeing these characters on the silver screen, I thought, wow, I like this. How can I become part of this? We've come a long way. It felt as if I'd finally found our town of my own, beyond our laundry, a world I could finally feel and touch, or so I thought. The following year, I joined the staff of Asian Cinevision, ACV, the Chinatown-based media arts and advocacy group that founded and still presents the AIFF. Hey, let's hear it for ACV, the Asian American International Film Festival. A great institution. It started right here in Chinatown. I was ACV's first full-time publicist and was extremely proud to repurpose my commercial music biz skills for this essential Asian American community hub. And it was an exciting time for Asian American cinema. Wayne Wong's Chan is Missing and Dim Sum had received national distribution and acclaim, as had Peter Wong's A Great Wall and Stephen Okazaki's Living on Tokyo Time. Does anyone remember those movies? Yeah. Great ones. In the nonfiction forum, Christine Shaw and Renee Tachima's powerful documentary, Who Killed Vincent Shin, earned an Academy Award nomination. Getting involved with ACV was a turning point in defining my personal and professional worldview and longing to belong as an adult. Previously, I was able to parlay my rock and roll obsession into becoming more or less a professional fan. That meant being through numerous music publicist appointments and freelance rock journalism assignments. Though that was the greatest life for a rock and roll junkie in their late teens into early 20s, by the ripe old age of 25, I was ready for something different. The eye-opening sort of homecoming trip to China further intensified my heartfelt but under-examined longing for a larger landscape. The new world I entered through ACV was the substantial arts, mass media connection my American pop culture psyche needed. This was the connection I thought I'd made as a child through the Kung Fu television series in the 1970s. In the late 80s, particularly in New York City, many previously disenfranchised groups were getting big-time face time in independent cinema. This newfound involvement came during the highlight of late 1980s multiculturalism. In this environment, many African Americans were starting to reclaim and destigmatize the N-word by using it as an inverted, if aggressive, term of endearment within their community. So, in the same vein, I thought the time was right to wear my juk singness, or lack of old world Chinese roots, proudly on my sleeve, of course with my tongue firmly in my cheek. The daily trek to my new Manhattan job was no longer via the 7 train, in which I had spent most of my commuter life to date. By the late 1980s, as a result of the direct line that now connected between Flushing and Manhattan's Chinatown, there was a new direct bus line between these two communities. Flushing was starting to become New York City's second Chinatown and first Koreatown, with more and more of its public signage changing over to Asian characters. On workday mornings, I got off the Flushing Chinatown direct bus and headed directly to Maria's Bakery. Remember Maria's Bakery? This franchise that was so prominent in Chinese neighborhoods, Maria's looked like a Dunkin' Donuts, except that the dishes were stacked with exquisite-looking sweets that, at least to an American palate, were maybe more sweeter on the eye than they were on the tongue. My first attempts to order coffee in Chinese were met with alternately amused and sometimes dismissive whispers of "Chok Sing." To their surprise, I responded to their whispers with the robust, "Yes, that's me, Chok Sing." A ritual was born. So soon, every day, my twice-a-day Maria's Bakery coffee shop stops became the highlight of their day and mine. When I would enter, now the staff would say, "Hello, Chok Sing! Chok Sing is here!" I was happy. After Maria's was up the 4 flights of shaky old wooden stairs that bordered uncomfortably close to being a fire hazard at ACV's office at 32 East Broadway, right across the street from the library. As I joyously scaled each challenging step up toward a new world of wonder that was ACV, I felt as if I were gleefully cavorting with the spirits of the Lower East Side, particularly the silenced voices of huddled sweatshop working masses and bohemians past. Although this too became a community I could feel but not touch, this one somehow felt more compatible, comfortable even. The 1988 Asian American International Film Festival turned out to be the last one to be presented at the Rosemary Theater in Chinatown. Proudly, ACB's final film festival in Chinatown would garner the largest audience to date for that well-deserving event. Our unprecedented attendance numbers were also greatly assisted by the Rosemary Theater's old school, old world box office policy. In that venue, a hot film had no cap on the amount of tickets that could be sold, or a corresponding number of people sitting in the aisles, standing by the fire exits, etc. The Rosemary's management maintained a box office policy that was the equivalent of ACB's well-worn staircase, a potential fire hazard. The Rosemary's box office was a pane of gold-tinted one-way glass, presumably bulletproof, with a small slot on the bottom with which filmgoers place their money and then receive their tickets. As you gazed at your own gold-tinted reflection and listened to the disembodied Cantonese-inflected voice, the box office seemed more like a portal to an alternate universe than a venerable old Chinatown movie house. On the final day of the 1988 AAIFF, as the sun was shining brightly on the Rosemary Theater at the foot of the Manhattan Bridge, now the departure point for many of those commuter Chinatown buses, I was coordinating the ticket holders line when all of a sudden, the spirit moved me. I felt as if all of the stars in the multicultural cosmos were aligning and I was in the zone. The moment had finally arrived to cross the final frontier, speaking the mother tongue. Kind of like when TV Kung Fu master Chang was ready to snatch that pebble from his master's hand. Or when Tommy was ready to smash that mirror that held him inside in his see me, feel me mode. But fiction is fiction, real life is, well, at my rate or through any metaphor, there was no doubt that I was feeling my Asian American oats. During the festival's final Saturday matinee, as I formed the ticket holders line, I proudly and loudly announced, "Niu Fi Kyo Koi," simply trying to say, "Ticket holders, please, form a line here." People just looked at me with bewilderment. "Niu Fi Kyo Koi," I said a little louder, if a little less prouder. The looks of bewilderment turned ugly, even to downright scorn. From behind me, I heard a loud laugh from my Hong Kong-born supervisor. He walked over and in perfect Cantonese explained to the crowd that I was mispronouncing the inflection of ticket so badly that it was coming out as fat. So instead of saying, "Ticket holders, please, form a line here," I was saying, "Fat people, get over there!" Everyone just laughed, shook their heads, and said, "Juk sing, hollow bamboo." But this was no late 80s multicultural act of inverted multicultural endearment, like my self-effacing encounters at Maria's Bakery. This juk sing stung. It was hollow bamboo, dead wood, in its oldest school connotation, to again point out that I still was really not one of them. As things go in Chinatown, so go things, as things go in China, so go things in Chinatown. Thank you very much.
Okay, one more time for Alvin Eng. Speaking of flushing, isn't there a Mets game on? Yeah, don't tell me. Don't tell me the score. Don't tell me. I don't want to know.
It hasn't started yet. You better hurry.
Well, you know the Mets. It's usually over before it starts. I'm a fan of a long suffering Mets fan. I mean, as a kid, it was like, if you like the Yankees, the news highlights would be them doing really well, like hitting home runs and everything. And when they showed the Mets highlights, it'd be the other team, like kicking ass, like clobbering them from the beginning. And speaking of kicking ass, I want to tell you about our next reader. Ping Chong is an internationally acclaimed theater director, playwright, video, and installation artist, and a seminal figure in the interdisciplinary theater community. He is the founder of Ping Chong and Company. Since 1972, he has created over 100 original works for the stage across the United States and around the world. Signature works include Nosferatu, Angels of Swedenborg, Kindness, the East-West Quartet, and the puppet theater works, Kwaidan and Cathay, Three Tales of China. In 1992, Chang created the first Undesirable Elements production in an ongoing series of community-based oral history performances exploring culture and identity, a work that encourages connection in a divided world. In 2023, he released his film adaptation of his stage production, Chinoiserie, which premiered at Asia Society. Published works include the East-West Quartet and a volume on undesirable elements, the first comprehensive volume on his body of work, the interdisciplinary theater of Ping Chong, exploring curiosity and otherness on stage by Yuko Kurahashi, was released in 2019. Recent publications include Claudia Orenstein's Elizabeth Lacombe, Ping Chong, Robert Lepage, Multimedia Interrogations, was released in 2021, and Sarah Farrington's The Lost Conversations, Interviews with an Enduring Avant-Garde, was released in 2022. Ping Chong is the recipient of numerous awards, including a Doris Duke Performing Artist Award, a Ford Foundation Art of Change Fellowship, and the National Medal of the Arts Award in 2014, and a Lifetime Achievement Obie Award in 2022. Ping Chong.
Thank you, Think Chinatown, Ava Chin, and Ed Lin for inviting me this evening. And it's wonderful because I know four of these people here tonight reading. So it's like being with family, Chinatown family. I'm reading an abridged version of a memoir piece. So I'm just gonna start. 50 years ago, I hitchhiked across this country for 3 months and then back again to my adopted hometown, New York City. A home I did not choose, a home my parents chose. One could argue it wasn't home for them either, since they lived and died in the tiny world of Chinatown. Or put another way, they weren't exactly welcomed where they landed. Being pragmatic, being welcomed or not wasn't all that important. Most of the time it could be ignored. Making a future for your offspring was more important. Chinatown was about as close as home as they were ever going to be now that they'd been away from their homeland for so long. In the time I was growing up, they never yearned to return. Their itinerant life in the New World had diluted what home was. By the time they landed in New York City, my parents had been traveling Chinese Cantonese opera folk for 2.5 decades. Yet home wasn't just a place. Home was their opera comrades. Home was their language. And home was their Cantonese food. My parents never spoke a word of English. 50 years ago, with a backpack, a road map, and Frank Waters' Book of the Hopis, I set out to see this country, to see what I had never seen before. With $300 in my pocket and time on my hands, as only the young could have, I left home. And what remains of that trip I took so many years ago? There was the epic physicality of this great land. But mostly, I think of the stray random people I met who picked me up by chance, in a time when picking up strangers on the road was especially acceptable. The kindness of strangers. There was the fatherly Colorado state trooper in his mirrored sunglasses, who gave me a lift, advising me to be careful on my journey across the country. The witch of Omaha, Nebraska. Yes, he smiled and said he was a witch. And his witch daughters, who took me out to lunch in a place carpeted with astroturf, where you ordered your meal from a rotary phone on the table. Two young libidinous studs who bragged about their sexual conquests of lonely housewives in this too often lonely land. The gonzo hippie with no teeth and straggly hair who had dropped out, dropped acid, dropped into the remote outback of Placitas, New Mexico. The two Native Americans who picked me up when I was stranded and lost, literally, at a fork in the road. I was not foreign to them. They mistook me for one of their own. When they asked me what tribe I was from, I answered, I'm Chinese. From 1964 through 2013, I lived on St. Mark's Place, East 3rd Street, East Broadway twice, 6th Avenue and 25th Street, and East 9th Street twice, once west of and once east of Tompkins Square Park, which at the time was a very dangerous place. It wasn't until I got to East Bleecker Street that I settled down. This is where my professional and adult life really began. For 10 years, I lived in a basement hovel straight out of Dickens, and then moved to yet another tenement on Elizabeth Street within spitting distance of my previous home for the next 30 years. 40 years in one neighborhood among artists and oddballs, and then the neighborhood was over, gone. Now branded as Nolita, the area had lost its soul. I no longer recognized the world I lived in for all those years. It was no longer home. In 2013, I bought an apartment on Park Road next to the headquarters of the NYPD and across the street from the Daniel Patrick Moynihan Courthouse and the maximum security jail on the edge of Chinatown. The nomad in me had resisted owning property, but there were existential and pragmatic reasons for doing so. I lived in a walk-up. The aging person I was becoming was not enjoying the daily 4-flight climb or the hauling up of luggage after yet another 15-hour of air travel from abroad. The threat of eviction seemed to hover over my up-and-coming neighborhood as neighbor after neighbor was being evicted on any excuse. It was no surprise then that a greedy corporate landlord had bought my building on Elizabeth Street. I didn't want the anxiety of landlords and lawsuits at this point in my life, when what I wanted was that most precious of things, stability and serenity. I wanted to be near my aging sisters in Chinatown who were always there for me. They would be needing me. After 57 years, I returned home to the fold of my family and my culture. The morning after I settled in, I got up early and strode down Mott Street, the heart of Chinatown, for breakfast. The street was empty, like a movie set before anyone had arrived, or a still photograph of a place frozen in time. Emotions and memories flooded my body and mind. I was going to Big Wong's for a bowl of congee. I was home. Yet in truth, there was no return home. Chinatown had changed. I could see the gradual changes over the years of shopping, dining, and visiting family there. The biggest change, the most devastating change, was language. The earliest immigrants from China had been from Guangdong province. Now, they are from Fujian province. Walking into a store and automatically expecting to hear Cantonese, I was confronted with Fujianese or Mandarin, which I didn't understand. All recent Chinese immigrants, no matter where they are from, speak official Chinese, which is Mandarin. I do not. What is home? I have never felt at home in the United States. Even though I spent my entire life here, I have never felt like an American. There is nothing quintessentially American that I can relate to. And with the changing times, I am even less likely to. I would have liked to escape to somewhere else, even though I know whatever it might be, I would never really belong. It's hard to believe 11 years have passed since I moved back to Chinatown, the closest thing to an idea of home I have. If I'm lucky, old age will continue to be relatively placid and tranquil. I have my doubts. I thought I would be moving back to stability and sanctuary when I moved back to Chinatown. I'm not so sure. Gentrification has followed me home from Elizabeth Street, my previous home. White supremacists advance. The colonists advance. And Chinese landlords are their handmaidens or traders or both. This has always been the untold history of colonialism, the complicity of the local elite, whatever their color. Chinese landlords are renting to hipsters who can pay top dollar now for a rat's nest there. Chinatown being one of the last affordable areas in Manhattan. Chinese landlords are kicking their own people out to make room for the conquerors. The hip Lower East Side is advancing. The new colonial advancing guard are artists, hipsters, gallerists, restaurateurs, and baristas. And they are already here, breeding like a cancer. I give my neighborhood 5 to 10 years before real estate development will completely destroy one of the last ethnic neighborhoods left in Manhattan. Chinatown will be reduced to a diminished simulacrum for tourists, and I will once again be an unwanted outsider, that is, if I live that long. 50 years ago, I hitchhiked across this country that once belonged to the indigenous peoples of this land. Over the course of the making of the United States, most of them had been forcibly exiled from their homeland or had their territorial integrity of their homeland diminished. Their children had been forcibly removed and enrolled in schools that had actively tried to deculturate them, brainwash them, rid the Indian in them. Save the man, but kill the Indian, was the mantra. What is home when you can no longer speak your own language or share an unspoken understanding or appreciation of your own culture among your own people? Engulfed physically and culturally by the greater United States, how easy is it to reclaim what has either been degraded or lost? As for the other Americans, the rest of us, the immigrants who the rest of us are, what of us? In a generation or two, any newcomer to this land generally feels that this is the only home that matters, the only language that matters, the only culture that matters. They are Americans, flag-waving Americans. As a first-generation American, I am in a liminal space between an ancestral homeland and a new one. This is unique to the first generation born anywhere outside of the place that their parents called home. Yet among us, why do some feel a stronger estrangement than others? It's a mystery. In human history, displacement, migration, or exile are commonplace. I am a recent product of that phenomenon, ambivalently belonging. 50 years ago, on that long sojourn I made across the United States, I spent a night in a shallow cave on a mesa looking out across a vast space of receding mesas. It was on the ancient ancestral land of the Hopi Indians in Arizona. The next day, in the rising heat of a summer day, I watched a dance of the gods returning home. In the village plaza of Oribe, hypnotic and trance-like, both young and old gathered to watch and listen under the vast open sky. After the dance ended, I hitched a ride with the only other non-native present, a man with long blonde hair and his son. As we drove away from the Hopi reservation, I looked out of the car's window. There was nothing outside, or everything outside that mattered. In the blazing sun, Across the vast, arid expanse, a vision appeared. It was a young Hopi on horseback, galloping across the horizon, his hair flying, his focus ahead of him. He never looked at us, not even a glance. He didn't need to. He was home, in a way I will never be. He was home. Thank you.
One more time for Pink Shell. You know, I'm one of these really annoying, optimistic, upbeat, kind of sunshiny people, but I really find it quite delicious to have like a real cynical reality check. Thank you so much for that. I want to tell you about our last and not least reader. Ava Chin, a fifth-generation New Yorker, is the author of the award-winning Mott Street, Penguin Press, a recipient of the 2024 Best Book Award from the Chinese American Librarians Association, and Eating Wildly, Simon & Schuster, which won the 2015 MFK Fisher Book Award for Excellence in Food Writing. Mott Street, an ALA notable book, and one of People magazine's top books by Asian American authors, was a Best Book of the Year by Time, the San Francisco Chronicle, Library Journal, Kirkus Reviews, and Elle magazine. Chin is the recipient of grants and fellowships from the New York Public Library's Cullman Center, Fulbright U.S. Scholar Program, NYFA, New York Institute for the Humanities, Asian American Writers Workshop, and McDowell. She is a professor of creative nonfiction and head of the CUNY Graduate Center's American Studies program. The Huffington Post named her one of 9 contemporary authors you should be reading. It's Ava!
Wow. Is it this one?
Well, this goes up and down. Just hold that to go up and down.
This one?
That goes up and down. Then
We are not worthy. It is so nice to be here with you tonight. Thank you, thank Chinatown. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Ed and fellow readers. So I am a 5th generation Chinese American New Yorker. And I have been collecting art stories ever since I was a child, largely because I was raised by a single mother and estranged from my father, who was a man so handsome, so privileged, that he was essentially the Prince of Chinatown. Now, recently, I was interviewing a former Chinatown native, and he told me this story. Back in the 1970s, when this man was a teenager, after a night of carousing, he and his friends found themselves outside of Chinatown's oldest building. Now, this is not just Chinatown's oldest row house, but it is also the oldest row house in all of Manhattan. And that night, they heard something. Gong gong, gong gong, gong gong, gong gong, gong gong, gong gong. The building had a heartbeat. Now, anybody else would have said, come on, how can a building have a heartbeat? But something about this story resonated with me, and so I texted him later about it. Were you kidding when you said you heard a heartbeat coming from that building? No, I heard it. And did you ever hear it again? No. So this building is special to me too, because it was the site of my greatest transformation. It's where I went from being a young woman who had never met her father to being the writer that you see standing before you today. And it all happened because of my Chin grandfather. Gong gong, gong gong, gong gong. 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 Gong gong is the Cantonese term for grandfather, and it's what my father's family erroneously called him. This Gong Gong was also a writer, and when I was growing up in Flushing, Queens, just like Alvin, but yearning to be reunited with my long-lost father, Gong Gong was a borough away on Mott Street, telling our stories to whomever would listen. I was a sophomore in college when he died, and we learned about it in the newspapers. This obituary led me on a path to finally confronting all of the mysteries of the past. Gong gong, gong gong, gong gong. Gong gong, gong gong, gong gong. Gong gong, gong gong, gong gong. 25 years ago, I was standing in front of that building, the building with a heartbeat. I was hesitating. To the right of the door was a buzzer with my father's name on it. I was about to do the single most terrifying thing of my life. I was about to meet him. I pushed the buzzer. And as I stood there, watching through the windows flanking the double doors, I saw him as a pair of feet running down the carpeted staircase. And when he opened up the door and looked at me, I knew my life was about to change. Now, I was raised in a family that could see ghosts as clearly as the person sitting next to you. But by far the biggest haunting was the specter of my father walking out. And now here he was, the man of the hour, looking about as uncomfortable as I felt. Gong gong, gong gong, gong gong. Gong gong, gong gong, gong gong. Later that night, we walked the streets of Chinatown, and my father began pointing out all of the notable places of interest. You see that store over there? That's where we ran Chinatown's first coffee shop, the Sugar Bowl. You see that basement over there? When I was a kid, that was an opium den. And then he pointed straight up the block to a 6-story red brick residential apartment building that seemed to encompass the entire neighborhood. See that window over there? That's where your great-grandparents lived. And do you see that window over there? That's where Gong Gong Papa lived. That's where I was born. I stood there, slack-jawed and astonished. I must have passed this building hundreds of times before without ever realizing that the family I most yearned to connect with was there the entire time. Just then, a man walked by, and he said in a low Lower East Side accent, "Hello, Stanley." My father ignored him, preferring only to have eyes for me. He really is the Prince of Chinatown, I thought. My father and I would only have a single golden year of getting to know one another before he reverted back to his now you see me, now you don't, Houdini-like ways. He would only ever be a ghostly presence in my life. But it was Gong Gong who was the invisible hand dropping breadcrumbs to the story. Now, we never met, but Chinese people believe that the border between us and the dead is porous. And I would later learn that just like me, Gong Gong would grow up without knowing his father. But this was because the Chinese Exclusion Act laws, America's first immigration restrictions, made it so difficult for Chinese fathers to return back home to see their families because they never knew if they would be able to get back into America. But luckily for him, by the time Gong Gong was 7 years old, his father returned to reunite the family. And that was why, for Gong Gong, family was so important. Before he died, Gong Gong left behind an oral history at the Chinatown History Project. He also left behind a family story, an ancestor story that he was working on with a writer friend of his. And he was also left behind an outlines of a story about his relationship with his father, head of the Andong Tong, which when I was growing up was referred to in the English language press as the Chinese mafia. These nuggets of information piqued my interest. And so I set about trying to find fact from fiction. I interviewed family members, extended family members, former residents of our building, and former residents of Chinatown. I collected the Chinese Exclusion Act files on each of my family members, and I even went back to China on a Fulbright to return to the villages that Gong Gong and the others left behind. It would take me 25 years before I could get my hands on that oral history. And when I did, I listened to 2 years worth of Gong Gong's stories and his interviews. I listened as Gong Gong's robust voice grew weaker and weaker with every passing interview. I listened until the only thing left in that final interview, conducted only a couple of weeks before he died. I listened until the only thing left was the final click of the audio tape. I could never have known, all of those years pining away from my father, that it was Gong Gong who held the keys to the story. And when I think back to that day so long ago when I was standing in front of that building, the building with a heartbeat, I remember what it was that I most yearned for. To be reunited with my father and to understand my family. But what is this strange thing called family anyway? A father who rarely materializes, a Gong Gong who leads you to the story, a resounding heartbeat that echoes throughout a community. Recently, an interviewer asked me, "Did you ever forgive your father for walking out?" I just shrugged. Forgiveness is a work in progress. And besides, does anybody ever really get the relationship with their parents that they most yearn for as a child? But maybe all of these years of searching for the story and putting the puzzle pieces together taught me something even more important. You don't always get what you most hope for, but sometimes, if you listen closely and you're very present, you get something even better. Gong gong, gong gong, gong gong. Say it with me. Gong gong, gong gong, gong gong. Louder now. Gong gong, gong gong, gong gong. 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 Gong gong.
One more time for Ava. Well, our time together has come to an end. Thank you so much for coming out. Amy, do you have some final words?
No, just have a good rest of the festival. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.